the topic of human error is very critical to the work that we do and to our clients as well, and something that I know is very close to both of us in the worlds that we operate in. How we can think about human error and the role of that in some of the data collection and some of the decisions that we make. Thanks so much for being here, Mark.
Thanks, Shama. Very happy to be here, and always interesting contributing to one of these debates with our close friends at Intelex. I suppose our little bit in the human error discipline, if you like, is at the sharp end in many ways. Here at Comet, we help facilitate really powerful incident investigations, and of course, in that realm, we are naturally always confronted with human error or the perception of human error anyway. In probably 90 to 95% of the cases that come into Comet in any industry around the world over the course of any given year. And you're absolutely right, depending on the organization and the conversation and their maturity, human error is viewed differently. And often it's understood, often it's misunderstood. Often there's a degree of uncertainty about where to put it or what to do with it or where it sits in the overall investigation ecosystem, if you like. So it is a very central topic to ultimately how we become resilient to failure and become a little bit more certain about the profitability and safety associated with our operations. Human beings don't come to work intending to fail. It's extremely unusual to find someone that wants to play the fool and ultimately come in and look silly in front of their friends or colleagues. Most people come in, if not everyone, to try and do a good job, and obviously to go home the way they came in, ideally in a good state of health and certainly safe. So when these things happen, then naturally as investigators you want to start looking at a much broader spectrum of reasons as to why they happen.
I think that's so well said. And the challenge that I think we can talk about a little bit today is, as you said, human error. Where does it sit, and how do we use that information meaningfully, and how do we not blow it up to be such a big part of it, and how do we respond to it and be really thoughtful about that? Um, because we know there's learning in every incident. There's something to learn from it, and that's a big part of kind of the COMET uh, ethos around root cause analysis and all that. And I'm sure in your experience, you have come across scenarios where human error is viewed in different ways. Let's call it that, in a root cause analysis or in an investigation, both from a culture perspective as well as every incident is a little bit different. Maybe tell us an example of a scenario where an incident was chalked up to human error and we didn't really go past that to go to the next level.
Yeah, I guess as we have this conversation today, there'll be a number of examples. I guess we touch on, and I'll try to be a bit balanced and not just pick the most emotive one or the most polarized one, because in most cases, of course, that there's a level of kind of balance as to where human error is considered. Firstly, to your point, the labeling of human error, I think, is really interesting. And just to maybe delve on that a little bit, we've always been of a view, and it's the correct view as experience has told us, that human error is not a root cause. And of course, when we stop at human error, we've typically decided in our minds that it is a root cause, because that's as deep as we've gone, or as far as we're willing to go. And sometimes the human reason for wanting to stop at that is actually quite compelling. It doesn't mean it's right, but it can be quite compelling, and therefore it can be quite persuasive. So it is important to acknowledge that someone's experience, maybe a busy supervisor or a busy manager, is maybe that they are compelled to land on human error because what they've perceived to have happened in their eyes with the tools that they've got would point at human error being something that was the end of that journey. And this particular example was a kind of classic example of understanding the DNA of what makes up, the ability to understand human error properly. There was an offshore rig which was being prepared for towing to shore to undertake some essential overhaul and maintenance. On this particular day, the sea was choppy, but it was generally within agreed operating limits, so that the rig was lowered and the operation commenced. At some point in that journey, an operator who had stepped outside to we think take a mobile phone call, and unfortunately the waves had come up and knocked out a section of grid flooring that was directly the door threshold outside his door. It was the only bit he couldn't see, and he stepped out and was never recovered. So no one's ever recovered the poor gentleman involved. An absolutely tragic outcome. And you know, within hours of being involved in the investigation, it was very clear that going out there was contrary to procedure. So there was an error. There was a human error. So in this particular case, the company's initial response was shouldn't have been out there. You know, it's human error. But in exploring why, it was quickly established that particular spot was where everybody went to take and make phone calls because it was where you could get a fighting chance of getting a signal, and it had become normalized. So that deviation, which it was, had become routine, and because it was a routine deviation, it had become normalized to the point that no matter who you were on that asset, that's where you went. So everything from leadership to the newest person that came on that asset, it was normalized to go and carry out that particular action. So suddenly the focus changes, doesn't it? It changes from stopping where you're going to get an answer but not a good enough answer to actually making that an organizational learning opportunity. We understand the failure stage, which in this case is a routine deviation. Unfortunately, because there was no way of speaking to the individual involved, we have to surmise what the influencing factors behind that were. But that was a great example of human factors in action and the organization involved embracing that and taking that
Yeah.
on board,
Yeah.
and then using that to make sure that those types of deviations that can become normalized can't be normalized again. So that's the beauty of this. And then I would go back into Intelex then and say, well, how does that help the reporting that comes into the Intelex system be more wholesome, be more honest, be more uh, prescriptive and
Yeah.
descriptive? Because you need that in order to do more with the data that you're collecting. So it's really important that people feel compelled to know to report because they know the organization's got their back.
What a tragic incident to happen. A great learning opportunity for the organization at an incredibly high cost. It's unpredictable and they're facing different decisions to be made every day. And it's good to hear kind of the tail end of that story is that the organization took it beyond human error and did use it as kind of a learning opportunity because there would have been a very significant miss in organizational learning if they had just chalked it up to human error and said, well, this individual made a deviation rather than what in the workplace is kind of making those deviations so
Yep.
normalized in this scenario. And almost on the other side, we know that humans we do always want to do a good job, generally speaking, right? Intention is always there, and then we are part of systems and circumstances and imperfect conditions where we can't always execute perfectly. And there is that human fallibility that's a part of every single thing we do all day long. Um, that being said, I'm sure there are small or rare scenarios where the behavior deviation is driven by an individual who's just not maybe thinking about things in the same way. I would imagine that to be quite a rare occurrence. But just while we're on that topic, how, in your experience, do we can systems make that distinction? How do we make sure we're not bypassing or undermining where there actually are scenarios where people aren't trying their best and are maybe being even malicious or negligent about something?
So
I don't
I'm,
know if
I'm I'm
that's
laughing. I shouldn't I
yeah,
shouldn't I shouldn't be
yeah,
laughing at that. But it's equally true that in order to build trust with a workforce by showing that when there is an opportunity for the organization to learn from an event, the organization takes it. A workforce still has to feel equally confident that if someone among them puts them at risk willfully or consciously, that
yeah,
that will be performance managed. And again, if we can talk in examples, um, we've had some opportunities actually quite recently to really put this to the test. But when the ultimate thing happens, in this example, the incident itself was a tug operator. It wasn't a marine tug. It was a land tug was towing a container, and it went round a roundabout at speed the wrong way and it rolled. Now, this person had put themselves in mortal danger. They'd put a number of colleagues in danger, and the only possible outcome for the employer was to let them go. Fortunately, they were let go without any serious injury, which was important. Now, we had the opportunity to interview about 60 of their colleagues for an hour each over the next 2 or 3 days. There was two of us on site doing this, and to a man and a woman, every single one of them said that that individual was banged to rights and had to go.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was an incredible outcome because you suddenly think, wow, in an environment like this, if I'd asked that same question 3 or 4 years ago, I'd have got a completely different answer. The organization's culture and its ability to stick to its strategy to really improve the way in which the two sides of the business interacted had got to a state of maturity where everyone understands what's wrong and right, and the human factor considerations within that are aligned and working. So that individual was one of that small percentage who was conscious and willful in the action that they took. This wasn't a genuine mistake contrary to procedure. This wasn't a failure to perceive or notice or forecast anything in the work instruction. This was someone who knew exactly what the expectations on them were and exactly why, and chose to do the exact opposite because it was fun to do so. And
Jeez.
that's a very different outcome. And
Yes.
to don't take that as an organizational learning opportunity would be completely unfair.
Wow.
That's an
Yeah.
accountability thing, and that accountability has to be felt. So whilst I am 95% on the softer side of this, and the organizations need to learn every time, that little bit there does need to exist. Because if it doesn't, it can feel in the wrong environment as a kind of get out of jail free card, which can be misused. And I think we all have to be accountable for not only our own safety, but more importantly, those around us. And that in that particular case, the outcome was definitely not that, and therefore the correct course of action was pursued.
I loved the word you used, the distinction between accountability, right? And I guess the realities of the workplace versus personal accountability and kind of being able to have a system that can identify the signal from the noise at times and kind of have a mature approach to human error, not a blanket where, maybe 70 years ago in safety industry, the blanket was this person made a mistake, kick them out. We don't want the blanket the other way either to say, oh, nobody is ever making no one's ever choosing to do the wrong thing. We just need more mature ways to see those signals and
Well,
yeah,
the fact is, the cold hard fact is that if you have an experienced operator in any high performing industrial environment, the last thing the employer wants to do is have to part company with them because the cost of that experience, the training, the development time, the knowledge of the facility, the knowledge of their peers, all of those things takes years to replace. So it's the last thing they want to do, and that's a perception thing because we sometimes, I mean, some of the rumors you hear when you go in industrial environments, and this place is going to get shut down next month. Whoever told you that? And
yeah,
they're just rumors. They're just rumors. And of course, you go back the year later, and they're still flat out busy, and they're still saying they're going to shut it next month. So I think cutting through a lot of that perception and any
yeah.
busy, industrial environment's going to have that. But human factor sits right in that, doesn't it? Because you've got to make sure that the facts get through and that the reasons to give people confidence to report are always front line and center so you can learn.
And to your point, like we see human beings react and respond in very predictable ways, where if you see that you're the operator with tons of expertise and you've been there forever and you're working to make good decisions every chance you get and all of that, and then you see people who are being malicious about the way they work and then not being held accountable, that can tank the workplace culture really quickly. And you can put the
Yeah.
best people in that environment, and the way that people will start to work and make decisions is very different, right? So it's a big part of culture, huge part of culture, yeah, and not a straightforward one at that.
Well, no, the process of having human factors in investigations wasn't straightforward. Again, a bit humble pie here, but we didn't learn all this ourselves. As you know, it was an investigation, a big investigation. in the late 2010s where we had a human factors checklist in Comet and we thought it was fine. And you would go down and you would select the kind of influences around the human error, and that would kind of hopefully feed into your analysis. But it wasn't a process. It was just a list. And that list was kind of, I suppose, like something like a five whys. It was very subjective and probably subject to confirmation bias, amongst other things. The drivers were twofold. One, to deliver on a just culture model, which said, if we need to learn, we'll learn.
Yeah.
You can be honest and wholesome in your reporting. And secondly, and probably more importantly, back to your comments at the start, to get over this myth that human error is a root cause. If you stop there, you're going to have repeat failure, and that's because human beings, to your point again, are fallible. Even on our best weeks or months, we're going to make mistakes because that's what we do, and that's as important an outcome for the organization as the root causes are. It's essentially like a layer of intelligence before the root causes that are just as valuable. So suddenly you've got this really
Yeah.
rich bank, and individuals feel more compelled to give you that information because they know what it's for. That's
Yeah.
really important. That's their chance to tell the organization, yes, I made a mistake, but these are the
Here's the
underlying
context.
why, and we want you to understand them. So it's a nice marriage.
You started the story by saying humble pie, right? But what
Yeah.
an opportunity like that you guys had, that you guys took on to learn and kind of improve the richness of how Comet kind of takes human factors into consideration. A really complex thing. Human beings, we're complex beings, and that's I think that's what stuck with me with the IDA is that how do you start to kind of parse through what leads someone to making a certain, like doing something, making a certain decision, and seeing that little bit of kind of framework for it helps to make sure that we look at those in as much of unbiased ways as we can. We think through all the context of it um and what leads up to that decisions for sure.
And you make an extremely good point. One of the conditions of the work that was done back then was this had to be something that an experienced frontline supervisor could do
Yeah.
with a little bit of training. Yeah, I guess the same principle applies in Hop when we're looking at the everyday stuff that we don't get wrong. And I know one of Hop's founding principles is that human error is normal, which
Yeah.
which we wholly subscribe to. And of course, most good organizations, 95% of the time, do things really well. So when a human being is about to run a pressure test and someone's put the wrong value for the pressure they're going to set, and the human being notices and goes and queries it, and had they ran that test, might have been in significant harm's way. That's exactly where human
Yeah.
factors
Yeah.
shouldn't be shouldn't be coming, because there should be some resilience to that, either engineered in, perhaps engineered into the equipment or engineered into the process around the mobilization of the equipment, whatever it might have been. But you can't rely just on that last bit of human judgment all the time, because human beings are going to be tired, they're going to be overworked, sometimes they're going to be mind somewhere else, they're going to be thinking about their kids' football match at the weekend, or they're going to be thinking about that fight they had with their husband or wife. All those things are going to be in their mind at times. So that resilience for me comes when organizations can engineer in fail safes that put the human being a little bit further back
Yeah.
that process, if you like. But there's so many cases out there still where the human being's judgment call is the last line of defense. And that
And yet we know human beings are the most variable part of the system.
precisely,
Yeah.
precisely. And so inevitably when you have a fatality, or when you have a serious operational failure, or you have a serious injury, or maybe something that's had PSIF characteristics, but they got away with it, you'll nearly always find actually there was nothing beyond the human being's judgment that was looking after them. And that's what we constantly try to build is from these investigations. The only good thing that comes of an undesirable event is the opportunity to learn from it. And if we can learn from it properly, and implement some of those fixes, and make the human being more resilient because of that,
Yeah.
then that's the only way forward. And it's not a quick fix, unfortunately, and it's not something that you can just turn a switch on.
And I think that in and of itself is how we build resilience into operations and systems and data and kind of and that I think is what's so exciting about the partnership between Intelex and Comet in the mutuality between how we continue to mature that in industry and how we enable industry leaders to use data to make these judgment calls.
AI is the new kid on the block. Not AI in concept mode anymore, but actually available
Indeed.
production AI. Um, and I'm going to bring the human into this again, because on one hand, we've now got the ability for human beings to interpret the findings from tens of thousands of records really, really quickly in order to see things they maybe couldn't previously see, working on the premise that the more you give a human being, the more overwhelmed they'll become, but the more you give AI, the more it can do with it, which is a wonderful premise. But also, if we don't retrain our brains to be better and more rigorous auditors of what it is the AI is creating, then potentially we're going to get things wrong as well. So I think it's a really, really, really important time for the two systems and the way in which their new technology is interacting to come together to make sure that what the human being gets out the other end is not just equally valuable to what they got before, but is many quantums more valuable. But sales and distribution and servicing is where all the harm is. You got to know where and when to go and make those interventions as much as when
Yeah.
to to make those budgets go further. So I think we should be getting more held to account on the system's ability to help point to those things. But at the same time, it's difficult to hold just a system to account when the system's not getting the fuel that it needs. So I do think that data piece is super, super important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
I think as we come to wrap up, I think I want to share probably one of the main kind of reflection that I'm having at the end of this conversation. And I know this is a topic that I think you and me could talk about for quite some time, and we have. Um, I think the main takeaway for me, especially as we started talking about resilience as well as data and AI, is how important the role of humans are in work, be it from a making decisions in unpredictable work environments type of perspective, and then even sitting in more predictable, air-conditioned office type environments and still making really, really important judgment on data, on some of the management system software type decisions that have more and more and more unpredictability. I think that's kind of a takeaway for me is just how important we are as humans and how important it is to understand how we make decisions and make them more predictable and um yeah, more resilient, I'd say.
Yeah, I think the mind changes. I don't disagree with anything you've said. I think the mind changes is around we don't see ourselves as the just the doers anymore. Now
Yep.
we're the QAs, the QCs. It's like having this technology is like having a little team that are working for you, and you've got to know how to harness the benefit of that. It's a difference in how we think. It's easier for the kind of completer finishers amongst us that are good at doing the diligent stuff, which is generally what safety professionals are very good at.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I struggle with that kind of stuff sometimes because I'm too much of a butterfly, and so there is a need to retrain the brain to make sure we're
Yeah.
picking up those things and what we need to do with them, because they're not going to go away. This stuff's not going
Yeah.
away. It's here to stay. The productivity curve on it is as steep as anything we've ever
Yeah.
seen before. If we think of Industry 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 in terms of what the big breakthroughs were, this is this is as big as anything. It really is. And we're fortunate, I guess, in the Intelex Comet world that the risk is quite low because the data is quite benign, actually. We're not giving away commercial IP or any of
Yeah.
those things in the client's data set. This is about operating well, safe, efficiently. The quality bit's a little bit more commercially sensitive, but broadly speaking, this is about trying to do good. And,
Yeah.
and and that's why we're finding as well, just to finish, there's a lot of industry collaboration on this,
Yeah.
whether it be in energy or in ports or in airports or in more broadly in aviation or utilities. A lot of the industry bodies are collaborating much, much more on this stuff because the data is benign and it can be shared. It's the one area where nobody competes. You
Yeah.
don't ever find a company competing with their nearest rival over who's had less fatalities. If there's one, they all want to learn from it. And that's the only good thing that they can do from it. So I think this technology is enabling a lot more of that collaboration to happen, and that can only be a good thing.
Hearing you say that is such a reminder for me of how exciting it really is. We're at this inflection point and it's something that 10, 20 years from now we're going to look back on and just to be a part of it, I think is really exciting in the role that Intelex and Comet are doing in industry right now.
And we couldn't be happier with the way that that's developing with you guys.
Same ways we get an opportunity to learn from one another and challenge each other
Right.
to do this in industry in bigger and bigger ways. That's fantastic. I want to thank you, Mark, for your time. It's such a pleasure chatting with you as always. I know this is a topic that I feel like you and me could talk about forever, but just in general, what a pleasure to have Comet kind of in the fold and to have the opportunity to chat with you like this.
Thank you very much. I'm no doubt we'll talk again soon.
Indeed. Thank you again.
Take care. See ya.